Welcome, everyone. We're taking a look today at key events happening across the globe.
That's right. We've got updates spanning international relations, conflict zones, some important social cues, business news, and a few human interest stories, too.
Yeah, quite a mix. We'll try to give you a clear snapshot of the current global picture.
Exactly, connecting the dots on the main developments.
Okay, let's start with Ukraine. There was a meeting between U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg.
Right, this was apparently their third meeting just this year. The Kremlin is saying it was about a Ukrainian settlement.
Third meeting. That seems significant even if, expectations are low. What does that signal?
Well, it suggests lines of communication are definitely still open at a certain level. Both sides must see some value in talking, even if, like you said, breakthroughs seem unlikely, maybe exploring very specific, limited areas.
Possibly. Meanwhile, former President Trump weighed in on social media, right? Urging Russia to get moving on a ceasefire.
Yeah, he expressed frustration about the ongoing deaths. And his former envoy, Keith Kellogg, also had to clarify some earlier comments.
Ah, yes, about that post-ceasefire resiliency force.
Hmm.
He denied suggesting partitioning Ukraine.
Exactly. Kellogg framed it more as, thinking about long-term stability after any potential ceasefire. So different U.S. perspectives looking at the future security setup.
And European nations have stepped up with aid.
They have a big pledge, $21 billion in military aid for Ukraine. But they also admitted, pretty frankly, that they don't see an end to the war anytime soon.
So a major commitment, but a grim outlook.
Pretty much sums it up. It shows their resolve, but also maybe a strategic calculation about wider European security.
But back in Moscow, the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, he's pouring cold water on any quick breakthroughs in talks.
Right. Peskov's being very cautious, managing expectations. It's a dose of realism, highlighting just how deep the divisions are.
Okay, and President Zelensky, he's been quite outspoken.
He has. He accused the Kremlin of deliberately dragging out the war. And he made a pretty striking claim about Chinese nationals fighting for Russia.
Hundreds of them, he said. That's new.
If it's true, yeah, that would add a whole other layer. It really challenges China's official neutral stance. We'll have to see how Beijing responds.
Zelensky also repeated his call for more air defense systems. He mentioned talking to Trump about it, too.
Yes, that need for air defense is a constant theme. It shows their vulnerability and their top military priority. Reaching out across the U.S. political divide also suggests they know they need broad support.
And there was a prisoner swap.
There was. Ksenia Karelina, the Russian-American jailed for donating to a Ukrainian charity, was exchanged for Arthur Petrov, arrested in Cyprus for allegedly exporting microelectronics illegally to Russia.
So even with all the tension, these specific deals can still happen.
It seems so. Shows channels remain open for certain issues, maybe humanitarian ones or specific interests.
Okay, let's shift over to the U.S. for a moment. A Supreme Court ruling concerning a deportation case.
Right. The court said the Trump administration has to facilitate the return of a Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. But they also cautioned that the lower court might have gone too far in its original order.
So the government has to fix its mistake, but there are limits on how courts can direct the executive branch, especially on foreign policy-related stuff.
That seems to be the balance they struck, yeah.
All right, turning to the Middle East. Israel's defense minister announced an expansion of Gaza's security zones. Rafah is now included.
Yes. That means about two-thirds of Gaza is now under either no-go or evacuation orders. And the UN is flagging critical shortages because aid deliveries are being blocked.
That sounds like a deteriorating humanitarian picture, especially with Rafah being affected now.
It's certainly very concerning. Expanding those zones into Rafah, which was seen as a relative refuge, raises serious questions about aid access for civilians.
And back to Zelensky's claim about Chinese fighters, he updated that number.
He did. He said Ukraine has evidence of 155 Chinese citizens fighting for Russia, apparently based on capturing 2 individuals.
And China's reaction.
Beijing advised against irresponsible remarks and basically reiterated that its citizens shouldn't be involved in armed conflicts, kind of distancing the state from individuals' actions.
So conflicting narratives there.
Very much so, highlighting how hard it is to verify info in a war zone.
Israel's defense minister also elaborated on including Rafah in the security zones, saying the goal is to leave Gaza smaller and more isolated.
That's quite a direct statement of strategic intent. It suggests a long-term Israeli objective to limit Gaza's territory and potentially its future threat capability.
And there was that heartbreaking story about the Gaza medic.
Oh, yes. His mother's words, "We collected his body instead of celebrating Eid." Just devastating. He was killed in southern Gaza in an area supposedly designated green.
And there's video contradicting initial Israeli accounts about the ambulance lights.
Apparently so. It just highlights the terrible human cost and the difficulty of getting clear facts amidst the fighting.
Also from the region, a Palestinian teenager, Ahmed Manasra, was released from Israeli prison after 9 years. He was jailed at 13 for an attack.
Right. And human rights groups have raised serious concerns about his treatment and mental health during that long incarceration, especially given his age at the time of the offense. Complex issues there.
Let's switch focus to U.S. immigration policy now. Temporary protected status, or TPS, is ending for some groups.
Yes, the administration announced the end of TPS for Afghans that affects about 14,600 people by May, and for Cameroonians, impacting around 7,900 by June.
What does that mean for them?
It creates huge uncertainty, really. These are people who've often built lives here, relying on that protection because of instability back home. Now they face very difficult choices, potential deportation.
And this follows similar moves for people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela under a different program.
It does. Taken together, it suggests a pattern, a more restrictive approach overall, ending temporary statuses.
And then there's the case of the Columbia graduate, Mahmoud Khalil. A judge ruled he can be deported.
Yes, even though he's a permanent legal resident. The ruling cited his role in pro-Palestinian protests and invoked a Cold War-era law about actions potentially harming U.S. foreign policy interests.
A Cold War law? That sounds unusual. The ACLU criticized it heavily.
They did, calling the decision pre-written. It definitely raises questions about political speech, activism, and how that intersects with immigration law and foreign policy interpretations.
And a very strange story about a tattoo.
Oh, the British man. Yes, his tattoo, a clock face with his daughter's birth details, somehow ended up in a U.S. government document identifying members of a Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua.
Wow. Talk about misidentification.
Exactly. It really highlights the risks when authorities rely on things like tattoos for identification and the serious problems it can cause for innocent people, like travel issues. Accuracy is crucial.
Okay, let's look at some global political shifts. In Turkey, Istanbul's mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu.
Right, Erdogan's main rival. He had his first court appearance since being arrested on corruption and terrorism charges. Now he's facing another charge, intimidating Istanbul's chief prosecutor.
And this has led to protests.
Significant protests, yes. His ongoing legal issues, given his political profile, really point to deepening political tensions in Turkey and raise concerns about the judicial process.
Moving over to Africa, Gabon is heading towards a presidential election.
It is, and the frontrunner is General Brice Oligui Nguema, the same general who led the coup last year.
So the coup leader is now the likely next president.
That's how it looks. Understandably, critics are questioning how genuine this political transition really is, or if it's more about consolidating power post-coup.
And in New Zealand, a controversial bill regarding the Treaty of Waitangi was rejected.
Yes, after widespread public outcry, the bill sought to reinterpret the treaty, which is absolutely foundational to New Zealand's history and identity, particularly regarding Maori rights and sovereignty.
So messing with it was always going to be contentious.
Extremely. The public reaction and the parliamentary rejection really underscore how deeply respected that treaty remains.
Let's touch on some economic and social stories. A big general strike in Argentina.
Yes, protesting President Javier Milei's public spending cuts. It caused major transport disruptions, really highlighting the impact of his austerity measures and the strength of organized labor's response.
And in Nigeria, a song critical of the president was banned.
That's right. Tell Your Papa, critical of President Bola Tinubu, was banned from the airwaves for supposedly violating the broadcast code. And apparently this isn't the first time this kind of thing has happened there with critical music.
Raises questions about free expression, I suppose.
Definitely. It tests the limits of artistic criticism of government.
Closer to home for U.S. listeners, coffee prices are going up.
Yeah, coffee shops are feeling the pinch. It seems to be a mix of tariffs on imported beans and just general inflationary pressures. A real-world example of trade policy and economics hitting your morning cup.
And Zimbabwe is making compensation payments to white farmers.
They've started initial payments, yes. It's a step towards fulfilling that big $3.5 billion agreement made regarding land seized over 2 decades ago. Could be significant for Zimbabwe's international relations and economy.
Okay, a few human interest in health items now. Sad news about actor Eric Dane.
Yes, the Euphoria star revealed he's been diagnosed with ALS. Sharing that publicly will definitely raise awareness for the disease.
Just awful news. And that nightclub collapse in Santo Domingo.
Horrific. 221 people killed when the ceiling collapsed. A survivor described it as total chaos. It really brings home the importance of building safety.
And a helicopter crash over the Hudson River.
Yes, tragically killing a family of 5 Spanish tourists and the pilot. A terrible reminder of aviation risks. Investigations are needed.
In Australia, an almost unbelievable story from a fertility clinic.
Yeah, the embryo mix-up. A woman gave birth to a stranger's baby. The clinic has apologized. Investigations are ongoing. But wow, the emotional toll must be immense. Strict protocols are just so vital there.
On a lighter, if slightly strange note, the Dubai chocolate bar.
Yes. Apparently started from a pregnancy craving, went viral on social media, and now UK supermarkets are limiting purchases. Shows the weird power of online trends.
And the AI doll trend. People making mini digital versions of themselves.
That's another one taking off. But it does raise questions, about the energy needed to run these AI tools and what happens with the data people are feeding into them. Even fun trends have implications.
Interesting point. And Uganda's passionate Arsenal fans.
Yeah, an article exploring why they might be among the world's most passionate, but also how it sometimes tragically spills over into violence linked to betting. Shows how deeply sports can weave into culture, for better or worse.
And finally, former President Trump signed an order about showerheads.
He did, easing rules on water flow restrictions. The aim, stated as making America's showers great again, touches on debates about water conservation versus consumer preference.
Okay, last topic area, China and tariffs. Beijing isn't backing down on those U.S. tariffs.
Doesn't seem like it. The reporting suggests China feels its economy is resilient enough and views the U.S. actions as attempts to contain its growth. So they're holding firm, defending their interests as they see them.
And we see the impact right back here, like with those coffee price hikes we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. It connects directly. Tariffs on imported beans from places affected by these disputes contribute to higher prices for U.S. consumers and businesses. Global trade friction has local costs.
So quite a tour around the world today, from major conflicts and political shifts to economic pressures and, well, viral chocolate. It really shows how interconnected things are.
It really does. What strikes me is that constant feedback loop between the local and the global. A policy decision here, a conflict there, even a social media trend. It all ripples outwards in ways we might not immediately expect.
Definitely. And as we wrap up, maybe it's worth thinking about the threads connecting some of these disparate stories. The underlying currents, struggles for influence, the human cost of big decisions, how technology keeps changing the game.
Yeah, looking for those deeper patterns beneath the daily headlines, that's often where the real understanding lies.